Hey, folks, and welcome to the Salty Seaman. Giving you another Tales from the Fleet. I know I'm behind on the military movie bullshits as always, but I get out of one fire, I go right into a frying pan when it comes to schoolwork and other activities. Apologies for being so lackluster on the channel. I'm going to try to pick it up this summer. In this Tales from the Fleet, I wanted to talk a little bit about, the junior sailor culture, kind of that era of when I was in Yokosuka on the Blue Ridge in the mid 90s, mid to late 90s. Because it is, I think I give a paint a picture of myself, and I think it's how my brain just kind of remembers it just mostly sitting in bars and chasing tail. Not saying that wasn't a big part of it, but I really think about it. I remember all the other stuff you do because you can't. It's just too expensive at a junior level to be out in bars in Japan every night because it gets expensive. Even drinking on base, after a while does drain. Like, especially back mid 90s, paychecks were pretty pathetic. So it was pretty easy to blow through your paycheck if that was your lifestyle, a week into it and leaving you a week broke, which definitely happened to me on several occasions. But there were other things to do. And to kind of explain this, I'm going to set the scene a little bit here for you, especially, I know I have a lot of junior people about to go in or just in training school, whatnot, to listen to this. Um, Overseas was a bit different then, and I have a good comparison because I just came from overseas, albeit, my last duty station 3 years ago, albeit different circumstances than when I was in Japan the first time, obviously. At the time, the military was going through changes from the Cold War mentality. The mid 90s, Cold War ended 89, 90. They were slowly kind of building down from that, a lot of base closures. And also like a shift in mentality towards how, we treated, juniors, going back to, we're 20 years removed from conscription days. A lot of that mentality is still there towards junior enlisted who are seen as, you know, they don't want to be there, and you got to force the best work out of them. Fuck them if they don't like the bad conditions. You get your GI Bill later. So there was a long time. There were no barracks for juniors stationed on ships because you have a place to sleep, you have a place to eat, you have a shower. The fuck more do you need, sailor? Get to work. So at the time, a lot of the bases were going under renovations, giving barracks to ship crew, but it definitely had not gone out to Yokosuka yet. Overseas always gets those kind of changes last. And as I found out later, if you're a Marine, the Marines get the last of the last. Their bases overseas kind of, still look straight out of the 70s a lot of times. But yeah, so that was your option. If you came in married, if you were a junior, that was your first station. You weren't, and that still holds true today. You weren't bringing your spouse over right away, at least if ever. You had to go there and then ask for command sponsorship. Basically, the command has to approve you bringing your spouse. At this point, you would just be getting BAH for your spouse back home. This involves, flying your spouse and or kids, household goods, whatnot, to Japan, getting overseas housing allowance, living out in town or on base, whatever. The command, it's the command's responsibility at that point to take that on. So it's not always a guarantee, and your own personal behavior does affect that. So not a lot back then anyway. You very rarely saw someone come in married young back then. It's definitely more common today, but I mean, it did happen. So, but for the most part, yeah, you're going to the ship. In terms of married people, second tour, yeah, you're getting on base or off base housing. Single, E6 and below do not get overseas housing allowance. You do not off even including E5s back then. Though they added E5s to OHA, single E5s to OHA around 1998. The only enlisted who got OHA were single were E6 through E9. All officers are not only authorized it, but could also live in the BOQ on base if they chose, as opposed to living in their stateroom. Though I think a lot of times they had to wait a while to get a BOQ room, the young ensigns or whatnot. They might spend a few months in the stateroom, but screw them. We're not talking about officers. We're talking about junior enlisted. So it doesn't leave a lot of options for the junior first timer non independent status. Your basic options are the ship, the most economical. It's free. Your bed's always there. You get 3 squares a day on there if you choose. You can take care of yourself. You can store good amount of stuff. I mean, and that's it. Not a good amount of stuff, but enough to get by. Very bohemian lifestyle. But it's tiring. You're on there 24/7 when you're at sea and on deployment. That's your life, and when you're home, it's like you don't really. It's hard to get a break from the boat. My policy was always I was never on board the ship any longer than I absolutely had to be, even if I had nowhere else to go or do. Uh, Other options: find a girlfriend. And they can be and not really on base because if you had a girlfriend from that worked on base, you probably had to share a room with a. She did have those girls. Of course, the base station people had uh, barracks rooms. But they probably had a roommate, so you really couldn't live with them and whatnot. But getting a girlfriend out in town, I guess boyfriend as well, but I rarely saw that. Uh, yeah, that was one option. What I ended up doing, and that person I ended up marrying, so that all worked out. Another one, and the last option, just so desperate, is living out in town, out of your own pocket, which generally requires a lot of roommates in a very small room, and most of the time that never worked out longer than a few months. And I do not believe that is allowed anymore. There was a lot more freedom to what you could kind of do and where you could kind of live. That is not available in Japan anymore for juniors, just because of the nature of how the rules changed. A lot more restrictive over there. So, what do you do as a junior enlisted when you're in home port? What is there to do? What are people doing to pass the time, enjoying their liberty? Besides hanging out in bars, besides chasing tail. Again, the difference is, this is a very early burgeoning of the internet. I don't think I discovered it till 1997, and that was purely on work. By the time I was living with my girlfriend, her laptop, or at work on the workstation. Other than that, there was no internet cafes. No rooms to go. Nothing. We weren't quite there yet. We were like 4 or 5 years from internet cafes. So that really wasn't a thing to pass time with. So you didn't have barracks rooms where you could get your own cable or internet. Of course, those things didn't exist. You got AFN and AFN only back then on the local Japanese stations if you did have a room on base. But for us shipwriters, yeah, it was a lot of going to the movies. We got movies about a month late after they hit, if not more. Sometimes earlier, like we got when the Phantom Menace came out, we got it weekend of. They managed to snag copies for the military. That was a lot rarer back then than it is now. Though even as of now, like when I was in Iwakuni, like the movies were still a bit behind on our base, Marine base. And I noticed they were getting first run movies when I visited Okinawa down on the Air Force base down there, which probably shouldn't surprise anyone. But yeah, we saw a lot of movies. More I think about it, the more I realize that was a that was a big thing we did for Pat. I remember seeing so many. I saw The Matrix in the theater there. I saw The Phantom Menace, as I said. I saw Starship Troopers and Boogie Nights in Hong Kong, of all places. Jurassic Park 3, I think. It was a there was a lot, just a lot of movies back then. The big time. My memories of those movies are tied to my service. So I remember where I saw them. The base theater or in Australia or Hong Kong or somewhere. And I saw Saving Private Ryan out in town in Yokohama. That was pretty interesting. So that was definitely one thing. Makes the most sense. I mentioned early on. Around the time where I stopped on chronologically, I think we'd kind of gotten out of like regular Dungeons and Dragons role playing. But big part of my early time there was the Fleet Lounge, which I've described before on these tales. Kind of the called the loser lounge. I know with people who that was kind of their life. They hung out there and they played tabletop for all their time off. Like that was their life. They didn't never really saw those guys out in town or going out anywhere. That was kind of what they that was how they were getting through their time there. And you have other places. In some places, you could just find little spots where you and your friends could just chill and hang out, and you'd see those around base, even if they weren't going into like say the A Club or the Seaside Restaurant. You just find benches, tables, people pass time, play cards. Places that allow to drink and whatnot. You could rent movies and watch them in private screening rooms. That was one of the things offered MWR on base. And that was really great. That was a time to be alone. It was just like you could just go sit in the movie, sit in a room, watch a VHS tape, pause it when you wanted to. Do whatever. Yeah, do whatever in those rooms. So it was, that was another one. Visiting the town. Visiting Japan, of course, you're there 3.5 years, and I don't think I saw everything I could have seen in Tokyo in my first trip there, but I definitely saw. For me, it was having most of the people I dated were of from Tokyo. So of course, dating is a good way to also it's one of the things you did pass the time. But if you had a Tokyo girlfriend, you weren't seeing her during the week as a rule just because of the distance. They had to work the next, if they have a job, work the next day. You go to work, rare to see them on a weekday. So that was kind of thing. You had a steady girlfriend, you're probably seeing her on a weekend, depending on duty status. And generally, a lot of the dates were them taking you around to different, significant places in the Tokyo region, Yokohama, whatnot, maybe even a little further out. So that was a lot. I saw a lot of the culture and got to experience it not just through like a tour MWR trip or whatnot, but through the eyes of a local who really is interested in telling me something about this or whatever. That's the other thing. There were MWR trips. You could really stay busy on those. Like if that was never my thing. I took more of my last uh, tour, usually almost always with my family. That did most of my career, which is very, very little NWR tours. I don't know why. I recommend them. Just the way I was, or just I'd rather go do my own thing for the most part. But those are always available. A lot of people took advantage of those constantly, and there were a lot of really, really cool trips, and there still are. I never climbed Mount Fuji, for instance. I was always like, at least twice I got seriously was about to go with a group of people, and whatever reason that always fell through. So kind of regret that, but yeah, I mean, there were different categories of people. There are people who never left the ship, and I think I've touched on them a bit. A couple of guys I worked with, it was like they didn't want to be there, they didn't care about Japan, they're just trying to get through their time, and they just use it to get in shape. They would just workoutaholics. Almost never went out. Sent all their money home or saved it or whatnot. That's fine. It's a real bohemian lifestyle to live for 3.5, 4 years, whatnot. But everyone needs, something. There are people who really got into the culture and they had their own dealings out in town. They'd be gone, all the time, dealing with whatever they had ventures and whatnot they had set up out in town. People who really got into, became like the, transplanting locals essentially. So there was you would see a wide variety of such activities. I think back then, and I think compare it nowadays, it's a lot more. Uh, I'd say more contained to base. Unfortunately, not that there wasn't a lot of people who didn't venture out much back then, but that was by choice. And now it's a lot of the bases are pretty locked down. The juniors have to be back by midnight generally. They might get weekend passes. We're at that, and it's sad and it kind of sucks, and it does kind of kill like just the freedom of exploring your host environment because a couple knuckleheads fucked it up before you got there. I never was a fan of that, but in terms of in-home entertainment, it's a lot better. As I said, you have, I believe the ships, all and really all the other ships overseas, like the bases have barracks for the juniors now. In said room, you're going to get not just the AFN channels, but you can get cable, you can get high-speed internet, and video games. And then we had video games back then too, but that's a lot. The dynamic has changed, and that's a bigger part of culture that I've seen. And that's how people overseas, spend a lot of time because they can't really do anything, and the ones that really want to do it, generally stay about one step out of trouble. So a little bit about just kind of the culture of the mid '90s back then, and comparing it to it's been 3 years, but I don't think Kuni's changed that much in the last 3 years. But and how it was when I last left, and and that was definitely my observation of it because I was old married man living out in town. It's just kind of viewing my juniors around and how they were living and the rest of the base in general. Kind of picked up like kind of similar, but then also kind of different. Anyway, that's it for the Salty Seaman this time. Next project, don't know. Might be a while. I might get a wild hair up my ass. It'll be out in the next couple days to a week. But I will see you freaks then. Peace.